Chapter 20. Merger with Madness. We sat, we slept, we stared. Finally Bog spoke. "All those years," he said. I knew he was talking about growing up with Kirill. The shock of the betrayal must have been catastrophic. I just can't believe it. If I hadn't witnessed it with my own eyes, I would have died denying its possibility. "I'm sorry, Bog. There are no words." And there weren't. What could I possibly say to make sense of Kirill's duplicity? The irony of Bourne adopting the descendant of the very person whom he gave his life to oppose was staggering. For the first time I was glad for Bourne's death. I would have hated for him to have learned of Kirill's treachery. The day stumbled into night, though there was no discernible indication that the world was going on outside of our tiny cell. Nor did we care. We said very little to each other. Vosh told us briefly of his escape and recapture by Tama's men. All in all, there wasn't much to tell. Though he had suffered significantly from his initial beating, he had faked the severity of it, trusting to his captors' carelessness if they thought he really was unconscious. He was rewarded by their brief lapse of attention and took advantage of it immediately. He hadn't gone very far before he realized that his escape had been discovered and that the hunt was on. He managed to elude them for a few more hours, but his recapture was inevitable. The guards made it very clear that they weren't happy about his escape. Several new bruises testified to their brutality. When Tama returned, he was with Tanjak, who thought it would be appropriate to reunite us here in the prison cells. Poor man, his fortunes had grown significantly worse since joining up with us. We fell asleep eventually, as much from despondency as from exhaustion. Our spirits did not improve with sleep, and we woke up sore and hungry. At times I thought we should at least talk about plans to move forward, but then it all just died in my throat. What was the point? If ever we had luck, we had come to the end of it now for sure. I thought about Camerac and finally came to grips with the fact that I would never see him again. That opened a floodgate of loss. I would never be able to help my mother. I would never sit at the table with Toll and Shaya again. Never walk the streets of my beloved Corona. Never see Alita. I would never hike in the Ricewood. Never sing the song of the Sunjay. Never swim in Wilsman Lake. I was sinking into an unrelenting pit of despair, and I didn't do anything to stop it. I might have drowned completely, if not for Bog. "It's not over," he declared into the empty space of the cell. I just shook my head and laughed bitterly. "It's not over," he repeated. "Bog, it's over," I countered. "The stones are gone. Our allies are either dead or have betrayed us. We're locked in a prison, probably been left here to die. It's over." "It's not over." I looked up at him. "Well, what can we do?" I asked. "Just tell me and I'll do it. In fact, I'd do anything to get out of here, but there's nothing that can be done." Bog offered no answer, but his face was set in fierce determination. He wasn't giving up. Well, if that's what he needed to do, fine. But I was done. I knew the truth of things. It was over. Some time later, we heard the sound of keys in the lock. The door was opened, and Jarl stood there with several other guards. He brought some food for us. His bitter sneer made it very clear that he wasn't happy about having to serve us. "Terran, you're to come with me," he said. I looked at Bog, who met my gaze solidly. Vosh just shrugged as if to say, "What can you lose?" I got up and followed Jarl out of the room. We walked up the corridor a ways until we came to another cell door. I was ushered inside, and the door was closed behind me. There was no explanation given, but I didn't have to wait long before the purpose was clear. Again, there was the sound of the door being unlocked, and I looked up to see Jack walk into the room. "I've got nothing to say to you," I proclaimed with as much derision as I could. "If you've come here to gloat, I don't care. I'm not listening." "Terran, I haven't come to gloat," Jack began. "But you must have known that this is the way it was going to end up. I've been preparing for this for a long time, but this is all new to you. You've just been responding moment to moment, event to event. I've had the advantage over you every step of the way. You actually did much more than I ever thought you could, but still, you didn't have a chance." "Great, thanks," I snapped back. "Can I go now?" "Listen, despite everything that has happened, we're still brothers. It doesn't have to end this way." "Really?" I asked. "So are you giving up? Surrendering to me at last?" Jack laughed ruefully. "No, I'm not giving up. But what I'm hoping is that you will give up. You will give up fighting against me." "And what, join you?" I asked incredulously. "You're even crazier than I thought." "No, not crazy. Realistic. Look, I know that you don't agree with everything that I'm doing, but you've got to see things from my perspective. Centuries ago, when the giants were banished from Terrace, they had experienced an enormous injustice. They had no opportunity to repent, no chance to change. It wasn't fair at all. I'm about to restore things to the way they were, and yes, it may be a rough start, but things will settle down in time. And I need someone beside me who I can trust. You told me I couldn't trust Tama, and I believe you. He'll get rid of me the first chance he gets, but you and I are brothers. We will always be there for each other. You can help me govern justly when we get back to Earth. Govern? Don't you mean oppress? I accused. Too much has happened to deny that this is what I must do. Too many impossible problems have been solved. I mean, I had a dream of restoring the giants to Earth, but no idea how to do it. Then slowly, the story of our history unfolded, and the possibility of our future began to open up before me. I knew that somehow I had to find and get to Taris. I had to convince the giants to follow me, and I had to discover a way to actually make it possible for me to bring them back into the world. Each one of these seemed impossible on their own, and yet each one has been accomplished. I'm on the verge of something truly extraordinary here, Taringer, and I want you to experience it with me. I couldn't believe that after all that had happened, he had the audacity to ask such a thing of me. Did he really think I would turn my back on my parents and Camrak and Borin? Did he honestly conclude that we weren't so different after all? It was unfathomable. You say everything has been accomplished, I said, sidestepping his ludicrous request. So how are you going to get the giants out of Taris and into the world? Jack seemed encouraged by my query, as if I was warming up to his idea of a unified front between us. Pacing the room like a kid on the morning of eventide, he began to unload all that he had discovered. When we arrived in Taris, I knew that I had my work cut out for me. Your disappearance, along with Father, was quite unexpected, but then I always figured that this was not going to be easy. I quickly realized that the giants would only respond to power, and the magic stones gave me more than I needed. Once I deposed our pathetic grandfather and his anemic rulership, the general population quickly fell in line. They knew that I was the real thing. Even Tama, in all his strength, was no match for the power of the stones. I learned there was a way that the giants could live again on Earth, but for that to happen, I had to destroy the portal. This, of course, presented a problem. If I destroyed the portals, I couldn't get the giants to Earth. I tried to conceive of how I could get them all into the threshold and then to the Earth while destroying the portals behind us. Nothing seemed to add up. The most I could get into the tree at one time was 4 giants. And still, it would take at least 2 hours to get them down into the threshold. If they could only be in the threshold for 3 days, it would mean that the largest force I could amass would be less than 150. I needed an army of at least 5,000, and possibly more if I was going to be successful. That's when I began to learn about the true power of the Dain Roshea. Tama was astounded that I had 5 of the stones, and he told me of the Photon's lifelong search for them. He also told me of the Guardians and their mission to hide the stones. The more I read and learned about the 8 stones, the more I began to see an answer to my dilemma. I discovered that if the Dain Roshea were to be arranged around the base of the portal tree, and it was to be chopped down, the stones would act according to their nature and produce a remarkable result. Other portals would spring up in place of the tree. Instead of 1 portal, there would be hundreds, possibly thousands. I could bring a full army of giants into the threshold quickly. But there's still one significant problem, which I'm sure you've already realized, having seen the tree for yourself. How was I ever going to be able to chop it down? The stones would be of no help to me in this matter because they were already being used around the base of the tree. I didn't know of anything that would be strong enough to penetrate its massive bulk. But then, you came through again. You found Corus Bane, the sword that can cut through anything, and so you see everything has fallen into place. I have the Dain Roshea, I have the sword, I have the army of willing giants. Don't you get it, Terran? It was meant to happen. And I couldn't have done it without you. We were meant to do this together. The one that was 2 has become 1. He had a wild look in his eyes throughout his entire recital. It dawned on me that was probably the only person he told the whole thing to. And he only did it now because he assumed that if I knew it all, I would see the inevitability of our association. He was filled with an unbridled sense of victory and elation. I, on the other hand, was filled only with dread. I thought you didn't buy into this whole prophecy thing, I said when he was finished. If the boot fits, I say, wear them. But doesn't the prophecy say that the roar of the giants will fade into silence when the 2 become 1? Of course it does, Jack continued undaunted. You've heard their roar, liberation, justification, revenge. For centuries they have raised this lament, but now it will be silenced because they will have their liberation. They will have their justification. They will have their revenge. Surprisingly, I could actually understand how his twisted brain worked, but still I would not agree with his conclusions. I was suddenly filled with the image of Bog's unrelenting and stubborn courage in the face of impossible odds, and that memory buoyed me with a determination I did not know I possessed. You will not succeed, Jack, I declared emphatically. I will never support you. I will oppose you with every ounce of strength that I have until either you are stopped or I am dead. You have my vow on this. Jack stared at me, the fanatical glow in his eyes slowly changing to a look of smoldering hatred. You are a fool, Taran. You are as weak as our ancestors. You have chosen to side with defeat, and you will choke on its fruits. I thought you might see reason. I thought that maybe we shared some of the same vision, but I was wrong. I can see now there is no one else like me. I was going to split it all with you, but you're not worthy to share in the spoils that I, by my own hand and ingenuity, am going to accumulate. You have made your choice. You're going to rot in your dungeon down here, and if I ever lay eyes on you again, I will kill you. We are no longer brothers. With that, he turned and left the cell. If he thought that this last statement was going to cut the deepest, he was wrong. I suddenly felt a release that I hadn't experienced since that day over a month previous when I first learned of his existence. All that time, I had been shouldering the responsibility of his choices, as though just because we were brothers I had to carry his load. But in fact, the one became two. We were not the same person. We each made our own decisions, and the consequences rested solely on the one making them. Jarl and the others standing outside jumped out of Jack's way as he pushed past them. Then I was escorted back to Bog and Vosh. I had an irrational sense of hope filling me, and it was everything I could do to keep from laughing. Back in the cell, the others noticed my drastically changed demeanor. Suspicion was written all over their faces. Don't worry, I smiled. I'm not betraying you too. I relayed to them all that Jack had said, including his numerous pleas for me to join him. I ended with his final judgment and threat. That seems like a strange reason to be happy, Vosh observed skeptically. But Bog wasn't confused. He got it. In fact, just as I received an unforeseen audacity from his determination, he experienced an unexpected deliverance of despair from my somewhat irrational response to Jack's threats. A slow smile spread across his face. Maybe Jack's right, he teased. Maybe you are a fool. Probably, I agreed, but I'd rather be a fool opposing him than a wise man at his side. And I'm just another fool standing with you, Bog declared. Then he stood up and gave me a huge bear hug, like only Bog could do. There we were, a couple of idiots, rejoicing in hope against all hope. Vosh shook his head. Well, misery loves company, he conceded, and he joined us in our crazy optimism. We ate the remaining food with a renewed gusto, even though we knew that it was likely our last meal. When the food was gone, we got to talking about what life might have been like if we had met under different circumstances. I imagined growing up in Terrace, and they imagined growing up on Earth. You would have been a combat's champion for sure, I said, and explained to them the competition that had been so much a part of our reality back in Corna. The thought of anyone having to wrestle Bog was absolutely amusing. I couldn't think of anyone, or any 10 for that matter, that would have given him the remotest form of a challenge. In this way we passed the time. It brought us no closer to escaping from our confines or stopping Jack, but it did keep the feelings of misery at bay. It was several hours later, when the satiating effects of the meal had worn off and our conversation had come to a natural lull, that we heard the commotion outside the door. There was some type of argument going on. We looked at each other in confusion as we awaited the results of this new disturbance. Suddenly the door swung open and Jarl looked in, obviously unhappy with what he was about to do. "There's someone here to see you," he said. Stepping aside, he let in our visitor. It was Kyril. Jarl slammed the door behind him and we heard the lock being engaged. Kyril stood there in silence. There was a moment of motionless stupor, and then Bog lunged across the room and grabbed Kyril's throat in a deathly grip. I stood there, doing nothing, as Kyril's face changed from red to purple, and his life slowly and surely slipped away.